Marcus always believed that trust was the one thing that couldn't be repaired once it broke. Ironically, he never imagined it would be his own marriage that would test that belief. He and his wife, Elena, had been together for 11 years. They weren't the kind of couple who posted perfect photos online or bragged about romance. They were ordinary, shared coffee in the mornings, quiet movie nights, small arguments over whose turn it was to buy groceries. To Marcus, ordinary was enough. Lately, though, something had changed. Elena smiled at her phone more than she smiled at him. She stayed later at work. New perfume appeared on her dresser, though she insisted she'd bought it months ago. When he reached for her hand, she would often pull away without realizing she'd done it. He tried to ignore the feeling growing in his chest. "You're overthinking. She's just stressed. Don't become the jealous husband." Then came the Thursday night that changed everything. Elena had left her laptop open before rushing out to meet a client. Marcus had no intention of snooping. He was only trying to shut it down when a message appeared on the screen. "I can't stop thinking about last night." His stomach tightened. Another message. Does he suspect anything yet? Marcus stared at the screen as though the words might rearrange themselves into something harmless. They didn't. His hands trembled as he opened the conversation. Months. The messages went back months. Inside jokes, plans, photos, promises. Every lie she'd told him had been documented in glowing text bubbles. He didn't cry. Not yet. He simply closed the laptop and sat alone in the dark living room until the sun disappeared outside the windows. When Elena returned home, she smiled. "Hey, you okay?" Marcus looked at the woman he'd loved for over a decade and realized he no longer recognized her. "I know," he said quietly. Her smile vanished. The silence between them felt heavier than any shouting match ever could. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. Finally, she whispered, "How much do you know?" Marcus looked her in the eyes. "I know enough." She lowered her head. And for the first time in 11 years, their house no longer felt like home. What Marcus didn't know, what would hurt even more than the affair itself, was the identity of the person on the other side of those messages. That truth was still waiting for him. Marcus barely slept. The words Elena had spoken the night before echoed in his mind, but one question remained unanswered. Who was it? She had refused to say. "You deserve to hear it, but not like this," she had whispered. The next morning, Marcus insisted, "No more lies." Elena sat across from him at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on the untouched cup of coffee between her hands. "It was Ryan." Marcus frowned. "Ryan?" She nodded once. His breath caught in his throat. Ryan, his childhood best friend. The boy he'd met in second grade. The one he'd built tree forts with, played baseball with, and stood beside through every major milestone in life. The same man who had stood next to him as his best man at the wedding. Marcus let out a hollow laugh. "No." Elena closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." "No," he repeated louder this time. "You're lying." "I wish I was." His heart pounded as she continued. "It started the night of our wedding." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "Our wedding?" She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "During the reception." Fragments of that night flashed through Marcus's memory. The laughter, the dancing, Ryan disappearing for a while, Elena saying she needed a moment to fix her makeup. Neither absence had seemed unusual at the time. "We ran into each other in one of the empty hallways," Elena said quietly. "We talked. We'd both been drinking. One terrible decision became another." Marcus felt sick. "The night I promised my life to you," he whispered. She couldn't meet his eyes. "It should have ended there," she said. "Instead, we kept talking. We convinced ourselves it would never happen again." "But it did," she nodded, again and again. Marcus pushed his chair back, unable to sit still. Every happy memory from the wedding suddenly felt poisoned. The photographs, the speeches, Ryan raising a toast and calling Marcus the luckiest man alive. He remembered hugging his friend that night, thanking him for always being there. Now that memory felt like a knife. Marcus walked to the living room, where one wedding photo still hung on the wall. There they were, Marcus and Elena smiling in the center, Ryan standing just behind them, grinning for the camera. Marcus took the frame off the wall and stared at it for a long time. "So, every anniversary," he said softly. You both remembered. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the morning was bright and peaceful. Inside, the life Marcus thought he'd built had shattered, leaving him to wonder whether anything about that day had ever been as real as he'd believed. 2 days later, Marcus met Ryan alone, not at a bar, not at either of their homes. They met in the empty park where they'd spent countless afternoons as kids, throwing baseballs until the sun disappeared behind the trees. Ryan looked exhausted. "I've been waiting for this," he said. Marcus didn't answer. He simply stood there, hands in his pockets. Finally, he asked the only question that mattered. "How long?" Ryan swallowed. It wasn't a relationship. Marcus's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask what it was." Ryan closed his eyes. "It happened once." Marcus stared at him. "Once?" Ryan nodded. "The night of your wedding, during the reception." Silence. "We were both drunk," Ryan continued. "We ended up talking in one of the back hallways. We kissed, and it went further than it ever should have." Marcus felt his stomach twist. "It never happened again?" "No." "No secret meetings?" Ryan shook his head. "No hotels." "No." "No sleeping together after that?" Ryan's voice cracked. "No. We spent months pretending it never happened. Then guilt turned into conversations. The messages you found, they were us trying to understand why we'd done something so selfish. We convinced ourselves talking about it would somehow make it easier to live with." Marcus let the words settle. He believed him, not because Ryan deserved the benefit of the doubt, because Ryan had never been a convincing liar. For the first time since learning the truth, Marcus realized something unexpected. The affair itself had lasted only one night, one choice, one irreversible decision. Ryan looked at him hopefully. "I know it doesn't fix anything, but it wasn't an ongoing affair." Marcus nodded slowly. "I believe you." Ryan looked up. "You do?" "I believe it only happened once." For a brief moment, hope crossed Ryan's face. Marcus crushed it with his next sentence. "And it doesn't change a thing." Ryan's shoulders fell. Marcus stepped closer. "You know what keeps running through my head?" Ryan remained silent. "You were my best friend." His voice stayed calm, almost painfully so. "You stood next to me while I made vows to the woman I loved. You smiled for photographs. You gave a speech about loyalty." Ryan lowered his head. "And then, before the night was even over, one moment of temptation was enough for you to throw all of that away. I'm sorry." "I know you are." Marcus sighed. "I've spent the last 2 days asking myself if one mistake should define a person." Ryan looked at him, desperate for an answer. Marcus continued. "I don't think people should be judged only by their worst moment. Ryan's eyes filled with cautious hope. But I do think they're judged by what that moment reveals. Ryan's expression faltered. Marcus met his eyes. It revealed that when something you wanted was right in front of you, you couldn't stop yourself, even knowing exactly who would be hurt. Ryan opened his mouth, but Marcus raised a hand. People call it just one mistake. He shook his head. I call it a complete collapse of judgment. Marcus's voice remained steady. If your impulse control disappeared on the happiest day of my life, what does that say about every promise we ever made as friends? Ryan had no answer. Marcus looked toward the baseball field where they had once imagined growing old as lifelong friends. I can accept that it happened once. He paused. I can even accept that you've regretted it every day since. Another pause. But forgiveness requires trust. And trust isn't destroyed by the number of times someone betrays you. He looked back at Ryan. It's destroyed the first time they decide you're worth sacrificing for a moment they couldn't control. Ryan wiped his eyes. So, that's it? Marcus nodded. I hope you become a better man than the one who made that decision. He turned to leave. But you won't become that man with me in your life. Without another word, Marcus walked away. Ryan didn't follow. Some betrayals don't require years of deception to end a friendship. Sometimes, a single moment is enough to reveal a truth that can never be unseen. Marcus filed for divorce the following Monday. There was no dramatic announcement, no shouting, no attempt to negotiate. His attorney prepared the paperwork, and Marcus signed each page with the same steady hand he'd used to sign his marriage certificate 11 years earlier. Only this time, every signature felt like closing a chapter he'd never wanted to end. When Elena was served, she called him within minutes. So, this is really happening? Yes, she sighed. I figured you'd need time to cool off. I've had enough time. Marcus, we can work through this. We're past that. Another silence. Finally, her voice hardened. You know, this isn't going to go the way you think. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? I mean, we've been married 11 years. She spoke with a confidence that caught him off guard. The house is marital property, the retirement accounts, the savings. She laughed bitterly. You don't get to throw me away with nothing because you're angry? Marcus remained calm. I'm not trying to. I'm entitled to my share. If the court says you are, then that's what happens. His answer surprised her. She had expected shouting, threats, arguments. Instead, he sounded detached. You really aren't going to fight? I'm going to follow the law. You should, she exhaled. Then I guess we'll let the lawyers figure it out. After she hung up, Marcus sat quietly in his attorney's office. You handled that well, the attorney said. Marcus shrugged. I don't need revenge. What do you want? Marcus stared out the window. My life back. Meanwhile, Ryan couldn't live with the lie he'd told. Every night, Marcus's final words echoed in his mind. It's destroyed the first time they decide you're worth sacrificing. He'd told himself there was no point admitting the rest. Marcus already hated him. What difference would the truth make? But guilt had a way of refusing to stay buried. 3 days later, Ryan knocked on Marcus's apartment door. Marcus almost didn't answer. When he saw who it was, he sighed. I thought we were done. We should be. Then why are you here? Ryan looked like he hadn't slept in days. Because I lied. Marcus's expression didn't change. I know. Ryan blinked. You knew? I knew there was something you weren't saying. Ryan lowered his head. It wasn't just once. The hallway became painfully quiet. Marcus folded his arms. Keep talking. Ryan's voice barely rose above a whisper. We told ourselves the wedding was a mistake. It should have ended there. It didn't. We'd stop talking for weeks, then start again. Marcus closed his eyes. Ryan continued. It wasn't constant. Marcus said nothing. But it kept happening. Each sentence landed heavier than the last. The last time... Ryan stopped. Marcus looked at him. The last time what? Ryan couldn't meet his eyes. The last time we were together, his voice cracked, was the morning you confronted Elena. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. This morning? He asked quietly. Ryan nodded. We met because she wanted to tell me you knew. Marcus's fists clenched. We were supposed to decide what to do. Marcus stared at him. And instead, Ryan swallowed. We slept together. The words hung between them like a final verdict. Marcus laughed once. It wasn't amusement, it was disbelief. So, while I was sitting in my house wondering how my marriage had fallen apart, Ryan closed his eyes. You were with my wife. Yes. Marcus looked away. Everything suddenly made sense. The hesitation, the rehearsed apology, the insistence that it had happened only once. Ryan hadn't been protecting Marcus. He'd been protecting himself. Marcus turned back toward him. You know what the worst part is? Ryan said nothing. When you told me it was only once, Marcus shook his head. I actually believed there was a piece of the man I grew up with still left. Ryan's eyes filled with tears. There isn't. No, Marcus replied. There isn't. Ryan opened his mouth to apologize again. Marcus stopped him. Don't. I don't need another apology. Marcus's voice was steady, almost emotionless. I've heard enough lies to last the rest of my life. Ryan nodded slowly. I'll leave. You should. Ryan turned and walked away without looking back. Marcus watched until he disappeared down the hallway. He closed the door gently. No anger remained. No hope remained either. Only certainty. The marriage was over. The friendship had ended long before Marcus ever discovered the truth. He just hadn't been the last person to find out. The divorce quickly became more than the end of a marriage. It became a legal battle. Marcus had no interest in revenge, but he also refused to lose the life he had spent years building. On the recommendation of a colleague, he retained one of the most respected divorce attorneys in the state. During their first meeting, the attorney listened quietly as Marcus explained everything. When he finished, the attorney folded his hands. One thing first, he said. Infidelity doesn't automatically determine who receives what. Property division depends on the law, financial records, and how assets were acquired. Marcus nodded. I understand. So our job isn't to punish anyone. It's to protect what's legally yours. Elena, meanwhile, seemed remarkably calm. Her own attorney projected confidence. We've been married over a decade, he told her. We'll seek an equitable division of the marital estate. She smiled. I told Marcus I'd get half. She expected him to panic. He didn't. Marcus simply turned over years of financial records, pay stubs, tax returns, investment statements, documentation showing which assets he'd owned before the marriage, what had remained separate property under the law, and how various accounts had been maintained. As discovery progressed, another fact became impossible to ignore. Elena earned substantially more than Marcus. For years, she'd received bonuses, stock awards, and promotions that had pushed her income well beyond his. Marcus's attorney laid out the numbers. You've actually been the lower earning spouse for most of the marriage. Marcus looked surprised. I never paid much attention to whose paycheck was bigger. It matters now. The negotiation shifted. Instead of Marcus trying to keep what was his, the discussion became more balanced. Certain assets Marcus had brought into the marriage remained his under applicable law. Other assets accumulated during the marriage were subject to division. Because Elena's earnings and some of her investment growth significantly exceeded Marcus's over the years, the financial picture looked very different from what she'd expected. Her attorney reviewed the spreadsheet several times. Finally, he looked at her. I think you need to prepare for a different outcome than you anticipated. What do you mean? You may have to transfer value rather than simply receive it. Elena frowned. That's impossible. It isn't. He slid the calculations across the table. Based on the applicable rules and the complete financial picture, you may need to give up some assets to reach an equitable division. She stared at the pages. This can't be right. It is. For the first time since being served with divorce papers, her confidence disappeared. Weeks later, the attorneys finalized an agreement. Marcus kept the possessions that were legally his to keep, including property that had remained separate throughout the marriage. The marital assets were divided according to the governing law and the parties' financial circumstances. To equalize the division, Elena agreed to surrender several investment accounts and other assets of comparable value. Neither side walked away with everything, but neither walked away with nothing. When the papers were signed, Marcus's attorney handed him the final copy. You protected your future, he said. Marcus looked at the signature page. I didn't hire you to ruin hers. I know. I hired you because I wasn't going to let my future be decided by the same people who destroyed my past. The attorney nodded once. And now it's over. Marcus closed the folder. For months, he'd been carrying anger, then grief, then disappointment. As he walked out of the courthouse, those feelings hadn't vanished. But for the first time since discovering the betrayal, they no longer dictated where he would go next. His marriage had ended. His friendship had ended. His future, however, was finally his own to rebuild.